Thanks for coming. I'm super excited about this big crowd this week. We've got Emilie, Schario, and Taylor Murphy talking about data as a product. And if you haven't read it, they've got a great article on the Locally Optimistic blog that I highly recommend. But why don't we just jump in, and I'm going to give you a warning up front. I'm just realizing right now we did zero prep on this. So we're going to go with it. Emilie and Taylor are going to talk for a bit. We're going to have time for questions. We're going to figure it out as we go along. So let's get started. I'll kick it off to Emilie and Taylor to introduce themselves and this whole idea.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. My name is Emilie Schario. I'm head of data at Netlify. Prior to this, I was the first data analyst at GitLab, where I worked for and with Taylor. I was there as employee number 280, watched the company grow to over 1,300 people. Before that, I was the first data person at Doist, which makes Todoist one of the most popular to-do apps in the Mac App Store. And then before that, I was the first data person at a company called Smile Direct Club. So a lot of data roles. Taylor, take us away.
Yeah, so my background, I'm actually a chemical engineer by training. That's what my undergrad and PhD is in. At a grad school, I joined a small startup here in Nashville in healthcare, kind of as the first data hire. My title was data scientist, but it was really like data analyst, engineer, munger kind of role. So built my data chops there, really. The data team kind of grew out around me, and my title when I left was director of data operations, but it was still a small company. We never got more than 30 people. I joined GitLab in January of 2018 as a data engineer, and pretty soon found myself managing the team. Hired Emilie, still the best hire of my career. And yeah, led the team for a year, then moved over to the staff data engineer position. And then just recently moved over to the Meltano project, which is right now a startup within a startup, kind of within GitLab, focused on making open source, kind of an open source data ops platform. And we're focusing right now on high quality extraction and loading with the Stinger ecosystem. So yeah, just to set a little context too on data as a product, this is something that Emilie and I, working together for many years, we have lots of conversations about this. And we had originally planned to give a talk on this at Coalesce back when it was in February, like right before COVID. So we've been talking and thinking about this for quite a while. Super happy that the talk is out and that the blog post is out. So excited to be here too and talk with everybody.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that has been so exciting for me, and I think I speak for Taylor here too, is the positive feedback we've gotten. And where I think that's coming from is that we've really struck a nerve. And what I think that is, and I'm gonna hopefully open it up for folks to chime in, tell me if I'm right, is that as data professionals, we feel our teams trapped in this service model where it's still an inbound ask coming in. We're still getting, hey, can you get me this number real fast over Slack? And our teams are burning out. They're not producing the quality of work they want. Things are taking longer than need because they're in this service trap. And we as leaders see the opportunity to do better, but it's hard to articulate to the business what that alternative looks like, especially if you've never been in a data team or seen a function that operates in anything other than a service trap model. So maybe at this point, I think what's more useful than running through the points in the blog post is kind of turning this into a conversation and a Q&A around, like, how did people feel? Like, what struck a nerve with you, if anything? Nothing. No one liked it.
One question I think maybe would be good for getting the ball rolling. How have you thought about converting teams that have operated more in a service role to something being more product focused? Like, what's the process for the transition? Who do you need to convince? Just curious what either the two of you hosts have thought about this, or maybe the group more broadly.
Yeah, my DMs have blown up this week with people asking pretty much that question. So I'm glad you threw it out there to start, Katie. I'm hearing a couple of different things when I talk to people, and I'll share some of the things my team's doing and then some of the things other people have mentioned to me, and hopefully we can open it up at that point. My team, one thing we do is carve out time in everyone's calendar where you're not doing any service work, but we call this insight work, where it's your responsibility to go float in the data and just like bring something into the organization, find an insight and bring it to the company. And that has been really useful because it's helping drive the work that people are doing. That's a small thing. It takes half of a Friday, which isn't that productive of a day for most people anyway. And people really enjoy it. So it's good for the team. It's good for mental well-being. It's also great for our impact on the organization and switching out of that service trap. Some of the other things people have shared is really lobbying to build a second team. Like if you have a team that has a service model in place, building a separate kind of strategic data function and letting people transition over to it. So like removing people from one team. I'm just looking at my notes because I prepared for this question. And then the third thing I'll highlight is one person mentioned that they declared bankruptcy on all the asks, and that was their chance to start fresh. That probably requires a lot of executive support. I don't know any team that can just be like, YOLO, we're going to ignore everything that ever came to us before. But Taylor, do you have thoughts here?
Yeah, I think you have some really good, like, specific and tactical advice for people in teams. I wanted to take a more broader view and think about this on a kind of a multi-year timescale. So data teams are going through a large transition, kind of similar to what like software engineering teams have gone through with the whole DevOps transition. And there are points, you can do a lot, and there are specific tactical things that you can do within a company. But one thing it may be worth thinking about too is like at some point it may not be possible within your organization to affect this transformation. And that's why startups are a great opportunity as well to just change companies to where people may be more open-minded to this sort of thing. Part of our reason for talking about this, for putting out blog posts is to get this sort of thing into people's brain. Especially, I feel like there's a new generation of analysts and data professionals coming through tools like DBT and this whole kind of new data stack. And we'll see people that use these tools become the data leaders of tomorrow, kind of like Emilie is doing, and is bringing this sort of mindset to their organizations. So, I say all that to say, like, sometimes it may not be possible within a given organization. There's only so much you can do as an individual contributor without executive buy-in. This is kind of a long-term project. I see. I joke about getting an HBR article written about this sort of thing, but like I genuinely think that may have to happen at some point for certain executives to really understand and appreciate it.
What advice do you have now for that to get the executive buy-in? That's my current struggle.
Yeah, you have to frame it in terms that they care about today, and that's going to generally come down to, is this saving us money? Is this increasing our revenue or profit, or is this doing something to enhance our brand? And those are kind of the three buckets that I see things fitting into. But I think the biggest one is you should generally try to push for like, this will increase revenue because we're able to better unlock value in the data that we have. We're better able to serve customers by delivering better insights to the business. So you have to connect it back to one of those things. You do want to connect it back to things of like, employees will be happier and there's longer retention, and that's, that can be a cost savings. But at the end of the day, like, especially if you're in a for-profit system, you kind of have to put your capitalist hat on and figure out how is this going to help the underlying business.
And to add on to that insight example that I mentioned, where you have 1 or 3 or 5 team members go out and find an insight and bring it back to the organization, that's how you show ROI right away, with very small, lift there. And those wins when stacked together will help paint that picture for your executive. So there is a little bit of like chicken egg where you need executive support, and you, in order to like carve some of this out, and you need to carve some of this out to get executive support. And the answer is to do these little bits along the way.
If I can add one thing, when I've thought about this before, like I actually think that the case is pretty easy to make for this sort of transition, which is that like service orgs, in order to scale the amount of people that you serve, you have to scale headcount. And so product orgs scale a lot better. Like you can serve a lot more users with fewer analytics resources. They might be more expensive, the individuals, because they require more technical skills, but the org will scale a lot better. And so especially if you're in a high growth org that's planning on, tripling the total company's headcount in the next couple of years, like setting your analytics team up as a product org, I actually think is a slam dunk there, just because it's going to be able to scale to the needs of the larger org much more easily.
And I think there's a lot to be said for having a roadmap and a vision of like, what is this? And so that gives you the ability to not say, no, I'm not going to do that thing. You instead say, this is what we're doing, and this is what we're working towards. And if everyone can see how that is benefiting the company more than I need this number by Friday, then you get to a place where you can get a little more trust. And you might not get full trust. It might be that like each person on your team has like one product like OKR this quarter, and you deliver on that while you're delivering on a bunch of service asks, and you move sort of further and further down that road of your roadmap being a bigger part of what they're doing versus inbound.
Another thing that I've found effective personally, and this, whether this will work for you depends on how much of a sense of shame or pride you have, but I have no sense of shame. So if you do end up making an investment that's more product-like or more long-term thinking, more platform-ish, remind people that they did a good thing by giving you space to do that. Just thank them for, oh, you gave us time to build infrastructure to do this going forward, and we've saved so much time. That's something that, because they have to hear you talk about it, and because you're thanking them for giving you the time, they do end up feeling better.
Has anyone tried?
Oh, go ahead.
Has anyone tried to start making these baby steps? And I would love to hear if you're willing to share. And if you are like Katie and I and have low levels of shame, I'm here to offer you moral support. But have you tried making baby steps in this direction and failed? What are the things you've tried? Let us learn from each other's mistakes.
So I'll kind of step out and try. So I think that for a while now, I'm Manuel. I work at Sonos. I work on our product data. And for a while now, we have been trying to make our team out more as a product team and less of a service team. One thing I'll say about Sonos is we're relatively large. We're over 1,500 employees already. But I say they got started late on really thinking about data. And so the sheer kind of hole we're digging ourselves out of is oftentimes overwhelming. And so one of the things as a product manager for the team that I struggle with is being able to clearly lay out that roadmap, especially when there are so many other software teams with a very long list of asks, and they ask, where is my ask on that list? And just the sheer time of being like, if I were to do this alternate universe of just doing service apps, you'd be 11th on the list. But the time it takes to even write out that list is taking away from time to make us be a product org. But then it allows them to have really easy pushback on I don't understand why you can't get to it. It seems like it's so easy. And so it's hard to defend why we would need this time and space whenever it takes so much time to just organize the sheer number of requests that come into our team. And I'm constantly ping-ponging back and forth between just enough management of the request to say no and actual time to build the product that needs to be built and advocate for building that product. So I would say I fail at times, often in a given week. This coming Monday, I have a meeting with the team and they want me to build their KPIs. And I'm like, where is this coming from? Like, I did not know this is something you needed from us for a long time. I don't know if I can get to it, but that's for Monday.
Can I ask what the reporting structure looks like? Like, who do you report to, and who's the chief
Yeah.
executive on your team?
So we report in our software org, and we report up to our kind of quality arm. So at Sonos, there's software, there's devs, there's PMs, and there's quality. And right now the data team reports up through quality.
And is there only one data team in the org right now?
There is one product data team in the org. Very recently, within the last year, there was a second team that was more kind of business oriented and handled a lot of financial data and operations data, and they have grown dramatically. And they have been getting more buy-in on other parts of the company to be kind of seen as a product team. But they too kind of struggle with this service, but they've just gotten more headcount. So their realm's a little bit different. So whenever I'm speaking to it, it's specifically to our product side of the org and how I handle product requests for data.
Yeah, and is the highest level management structure like director level that has data in their title, or is it at the manager
Correct.
level?
It is. We have a director of product data. There's not a chief data officer or like a VP of data. Yeah.
I ask those questions because I do think some of these discussions boil down to like, how much power do you have in the organization? And there's explicit power of, reporting structures, and there's kind of soft power of who do you have relationships with. And sometimes that's hard to overcome. I don't want to say like, throw your hands up and give up, but like recognizing the realities of just how hard it can be to affect, like what we advocate for is a relatively transformational change that's hard to do from the ground up. Yeah, so it's tough because you have to protect your team, you have to protect yourself, just like mentally from everything. But recognizing that power imbalance is, I think, just part of the challenge. I don't have any great answers because the highest org that I've like the highest level for an org that I've ever worked in, like only recently did GitLab actually get like a senior director of data. And I was a director myself in a small company. So it's like, yeah, I get it. Emilie, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't have anything in particular that I'll mention, other than I don't think there's a world where the data team is only a product thing. Like I think teams will always have a service component, and it's about figuring out where that balance is. Is David Murray on the call by any chance? He and I had a really great back and forth in Slack. No. He mentioned thinking about the service part as more of a consulting relationship and less of a service. And that's been, I agreed with him the whole time, and I just had never articulated it that way. I thought that was really good. And thinking about the service work you're doing as more of an enablement and a consulting opportunity instead of a service work, but that's never going to go away. I just think there's an organization change that we need to make.
Yeah, so this is actually something that we struggle with on our core product team a lot also. I work at a B2B company that has really large enterprise partners. We're really small. That has a tendency to have an outsized impact on your roadmap and make even product not function the way you want product to function. And one of the ways that we've dealt with it that is increasingly effective is vertically splitting tech teams and pulling as much ad hoc into an ad hoc team as possible. So there are teams who do front end changes, and their turnaround time is really quick, and they know what they're in for, and they came in looking for that kind of role. They're super comfortable with it. And there's kind of a spectrum, there's sort of other bits of it. And there's like the core platform team that is working on the most strategic parts of what we're building. And they are as protected as possible from the distracting bits. So, we're at like a 40-person eng org before you get that level of differentiation, which is really hard in data because you're dealing usually with much smaller teams than that. But the more that you can put up we have a lot of conversations about how just like in general, the core of the business pulls stuff away from innovation. Like in every organization, that is just a constant struggle. And so if you need to do something that is strategically important, that's very innovative, you have to put up as firm a wall as possible to protect the resources that are going to do that thing. And yet, if there's still a part that has to be ad hoc and more consultative and servicey, provide the resources, but put a box around them.
Irina, you added a really great comment in the chat. Do you want to talk through that a little bit?
Sure. So echoing Manuel's point that sometimes it's really, somebody comes to you, stakeholder, another executive, and says, oh, can you do this thing? It's going to take 5 minutes. Why is this taking a whole quarter? And sometimes what I found works is actually visualizing the data challenges to say, okay, we have this one source here, and then we need to pull this thing here, and then we don't have a thing to merge on this third source. And then by the time we want to add in the fifth one, they can see just how hairy that graph looks. And then right away they say, oh yeah, that's true. That is going to take a while. And then that gives you a little bit of time, or hopefully buy-in, to say, okay, let's tackle those things first, and then we can do these other tasks. And I found that communicates that much better.
Yeah, and that's kind of the role of the product manager generally, right? Is to surface all those connections, and particular in the data product manager role, is to say, like, this isn't as easy as it is to say. Sorry, and I interrupted somebody.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that I think that gets at something that is a real struggle for a lot of data teams, is people don't know what the components of what they're asking is. So being able to really segment it and break it down and talk about, like, well, this part is easy, and if you need something right now, or you need something in like 2 days, like, this is what we can do for you. And really just making sure people are familiar with the trade-offs, so that data is not just this mystical magic function. Because like people don't do that as much with engineering teams right now. Like they don't tell them to build an entire microservice in an afternoon, but you get asks that are equivalent to that on data. So really just taking time to work with the stakeholders that you're trying to manage and explain all the different parameters and quality that you get given the circumstances and the time frame is something that goes a long way.
One thing I'll ask the group, and also throw out to Emilie as well, since she's actively running a data team. One thing that GitLab is really good at, and I guess kind of known for, is highly valuing asynchronous work, and also being very prescriptive about how we work and how we work in issues, how everything is a merge request. And I'm curious if folks have really systematized how requests are inbound to the data team, and just how you've put process around everything that you're doing. Emilie, I'm sure you work out of issues, but like, what was the process when you came into Netlify? Have you changed it? And then, what is the group seeing?
Yeah, there was none when I started. There were issues, but nobody used them, and I don't really understand what they were doing before. We still get a lot of people who ping like, hey, can I get this thing real fast in Slack, which is probably the nightmare of every data person ever. And one thing I did was set up a Slack bot that responds to the phrase data team issue with, you can create a data team issue at this repo and a colon, and then a link to where you can create an issue. And so whenever those asks come in, I always say something like, thanks so much for the question. We're happy to prioritize it against our other work. Can you please create a data team issue? And that triggers the Slack bot. And I like that the Slack bot sends the link and not me. But that's kind of the process we found really well. That's working really well. We work in 2-week milestones. And in that milestone, we have some portion of responding to people's questions and some portion of doing the things we need to do. And then there's always room for things that pop up.
So hi, my name is Kenny. Currently just leading the data engineering team at Tucows. One of the things that I've sort of like tried to advocate for my team and for the rest of the data team is to like, you know, question the request. I think a lot of us are just like used to like, oh, we want this number and like that's it. And I think there's been I can't remember, there's been Twitter discussions around like intake forms and sort of like make people, I don't want to say suffer, but like sort of like think through like what is it that you really want and what's the outcome that's driving. It's still a work in progress, right? Because a lot of people are not used to it, but like sort of at least in the data engineering team, we spend a few minutes questioning everything that we're being requested because when we started, we were getting requests for data sources and then the data sources were there and no one was using them. So like it started becoming an issue of like, well, you asked me to prioritize this, but I don't see anybody using it. So
yeah, that's great insight. The question I like to use is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And turning that back on people, because not to knock on finance people, but finance people like to say, I want a spreadsheet and I want it to look like this and I want it to have these columns. And my question is always, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Because there might be data that's actually more useful than what you're asking for. There might be, additional columns that you need that we know we have. There might be hiccups that we can anticipate now. Like being able to flip the question from, hey, what is your ask, to what is the problem you're trying to solve is really powerful. But I almost see them as two separate things, where you need an intake system where people are making requests to the data team so you can organize them. And then you need a requirements gathering system where you're effectively working with whoever is making the ask to actually understand the problem. And I like to, there's that great Ford quote that's like, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses, right? Or something like that. And
But what if Johnny McFinance comes back and says, the problem I'm trying to solve is I need this spreadsheet with these columns in it?
if you're not going to work like a partner, we're not going to be able to help you.
There you go.
YOLO.
Like, we have to be on the same team.
Yeah, I think that like same team mentality is really interesting because I think it cuts both ways and it depends what you're solving for. Like there are times when I think it's also really valuable to over-index in giving people data so that they will use data. And so we kind of do it in terms of like, are you asking for something that's really easy? And even if, it's very interruptive, like the best path forward for you to feel like we are your partner is to get this done and move on. We don't need to boil the ocean. We don't need to like have a requirements meeting every time. Versus when do you lean into putting more friction in the process and finding that right balance so that people actually see the data team as a partner and do come with questions and can get into that, versus feeling like, oh my God, every time I ask for something, it takes me like 2 days to write a spec. Or explain the business context of my problem so that they can figure out what the right solution is. So it's definitely sort of finding the right
balancing act.
I want to quickly add on to both what Caitlin and Emily said. I think sometimes the thing that gets missed in this conversation is that switching to a product-driven org doesn't just mean that you can like tell everyone requesting things to go to hell, right? It actually like puts the responsibility on you. Product managers in software teams don't just go and ask customers what they want and then give them exactly that and then like get angry when it's not what the customer actually needs, right? Like you actually have to flip that responsibility. Product managers spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, this is what the customers are saying. This is what I think that actually means. This is what I think we need to build in order to be able to solve that. And they take that responsibility on themselves. And I think that analytics teams that are moving in the product direction actually need to take that responsibility. You need to be thinking about, okay, what is it that the organization really needs? How are we best going to be able to serve that? And it can't just be like, okay, well, we gave you what you asked for, like, because that doesn't work anymore, especially in a product-driven org. If you're going to be product-driven, you have to like take on all of the responsibility that means, which I think is better overall, but it is like an extra part of responsibility. And I think that, analytics leaders really need to think through exactly what the implications of that are as they're going down that path.
Yeah, it's all about defining what you're maximizing for, and that's not throughput, and that's not sort of efficiency. It is user delight at the end of the day. Like, are people using your product to make better decisions?
Business impact, right?
How do you actually quantify that though? Like that's something that like I've always had a little bit of difficulty with. Like as a data person, you're always telling people like you can't use milestone-based KRs. Like how do you make more quantitative KRs for your data team when it's operating as a product team?
Well, one of the things that, well, hi, I'm Dorian. I am a product manager. I was a data product manager at Casper when we first kind of made that shift from a very service-oriented to a product-oriented data organization. One of the things that we did to get that feedback is we actually had surveys that we would send out to our key partners across all the different orgs, especially when you have this very close relationship between a data scientist or a data analyst and an individual on a marketing team or on a finance team. In the shift towards the kind of more product focused, a lot of those relationships can become a bit more tense. And you do want to avoid what we kind of just said, which is like, the transition isn't, hey, screw you, we're gonna go work on our own stuff right now. We're gonna go work on the infrastructure. It's all gonna be great, but we're just gonna do that and not listen to you. It is, at the end of the day, supposed to make their lives easier, help them to make better decisions. Like the data team is there at the end of the day to support the business. It's not necessary, most companies, not the one that's actually creating the value for the business's customers. And so keeping that in mind, and as you go through this process, keeping that feedback, whether like a survey is like a very formal way to do it, but even in just regular conversations with those folks to see, hey, how's this going? Not just with the senior managers of the marketing team, but with the individuals that you had that close relationship with before.
Yeah, and I'll say like tying things to outcomes, like having those conversations of like, what problem are you trying to solve? That's where you can start to tease out like, what are the initiatives? If you're not transparent with the rest of the org of what the sales team's KRs or whatever, you can start to tease those out and identify like what are the value drivers that sales and engineering are trying to achieve, and start to tie those back to your efforts too. It's like, we're doing this to help sales achieve this KR, which is expected to increase revenue of 5% or whatever. And so that helps tease it apart rather than just, well, VP of sales is asking for this, so I'm gonna go do it. But a lot of it's politics. I mean, a lot of the things that we're talking about is just talking to people, figuring out, is this person going to be an influencer in the organization? And if I, like Caitlin was saying, if you do the quick ask for them, it gives them a good impression of the data team. You can sell them the vision of where you're trying to move to, and you've bought yourself some goodwill with that person. I don't mean to imply that everything is transactional, but we are humans, and there is a bit of politics in different companies, so it's something to be aware of.
There was a thread recently, I think, in the Leading Data Teams channel around how people are marketing their work. And I think that's part of the answer here. You have to do what's best for your organization. I think maybe you try a couple iterations, but your data team needs to market the work they're doing. And some of it is not beautiful. And some of it is just truly plumbing, especially for data engineering folks. It is work that when it's happening behind the scenes, nobody realizes it. But the impact it's having to the organization, I see this a lot in the operational analytics work we're doing, where you do this in the application that triggers this thing that happens, that surfaces you to a marketer, to a salesperson. Those sorts of things, now that they're in place, like people do take them for granted, and they're super impactful. When they break, people will notice. And so marketing along the way, all the things you are doing, is really, really important. And that's the business impact you're having.
I have a question along those lines. Oh, hi everyone, Selena Wong, lead data at a skincare startup called Tula. Along those lines of like marketing that work, right? Like people like to, it's almost like if things break, there's a negative, association to the data team. So I'm curious, in the moments when you market, how do you market, right? Like, do you market, where are the channels to market those opportunities? Because right now what I'm struggling with is, from those moments of insight, you're presenting it to that particular team, but the executive team doesn't see it, right? Because they may roll it up to the executive team as 1 or 2 slides of like, oh yeah, this is also the data we collected, but it's we as whatever that business partner is saying versus the data team actually gave this insight. So I'm curious to hear what other people have done successfully to put the data analytics team at the forefront of being the one actually generating that insight.
So it's Kenny again. I don't know if it's been successful, but for data engineering, definitely, like, there's little exposure for our work. So what I'll do is, we actually have a central channel called Help Analytics, where people are encouraged to join, and has everything to do with stakeholders, asking questions. And I will do is, at the end of the week, I usually send a post full of emojis saying the data engineering team has successfully added these sources. If you guys, if you are interested in any of this, reach out to your friendly data analyst team member, and make sure that they can help you out to get value out of this new data source. And I just do that. I don't really know if it's impactful or not, but I'm putting it out there in a place where the rest of the organization does that.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen and show a screenshot of an old update of ours. And I'm going to try to only share the screenshot. Do you see? Yeah, I'm covering everything else. So this is an example of a blurb that goes out in our weekly engineering email to the entire company. That's like, hey, here are the things we shipped. There's a legend to the emojis up above this, but this has been great. But this is just a recap. So there's also, every time we bring an insight to the organization, we share it in an insight specific channel called internal stats and graphs with a Z, because it makes it more interesting. And then we also make sure, if I am working on something and I'm working with Johnny McFinance, my partner, it's not enough to just share that with him. I'm also going to surface it to the entire finance channel. And we found that to be really important in kind of cross-surfacing, not just in specific teams, but like if we do something to serve growth, we'll usually also highlight it to the rest of the product organization. It is not on you to be responsible for other people's information consumption. So you're better off over marketing and sharing more and letting other people control their Slack notifications.
And some of this feels performative for sure. But it has, you have to recognize, so I'm somebody who, I don't necessarily have to be praised in public to feel good about the work that I'm doing. And I've worked with people that feel the same way, and I've worked with people that do like that public praise. But I do see, and I've kind of come to learn as organizations get larger, like you do just have to be a little bit more public and performative about advertising the actual work that you're doing. And the way to make it feel better is to just be very real and very honest. Like we're proud of this, and this is what we did. Not this was the best thing that we've ever done in this quarter. Yada yada yada. So that I think is take that advice as you will. I will say one thing I really love that our director of data kind of introduced was like a demo day. So we invite, we have demo day on a regular basis, once a week. It's a chance for anybody in the data team to kind of share something they're proud of, whether it's a dashboard, or I was always excited to share, like, here's this new DBT feature that we implemented. And then we would invite people as well to kind of be guest speakers. And those are recorded, those are shared broadly. And I really enjoyed that because it's just a nice way to share what you've been working on. And we have demo days in Meltano too. So.
One other strategy that I'll quickly tack on, and Taylor, I'm surprised you didn't bring this up. I feel like this is something that would be top of mind for you. I believe that analytics leaders, one of their #1 jobs is having good relationships with all the other leaders in the team, right? Like that's part of the job. And it's something that when I'm talking to new analytics leaders, I have to sort of coach them on a little bit because it's not part of your job really when you're sort of more junior in the organization. But as a senior analytics leader, like you should be schmoozing with the other VPs and the other senior people in the org as much as you can. And you should be, this is another place where you can be doing this marketing. Again, as Taylor said, like, and sort of everyone has said, not like sort of bragging or like being unreasonable, but just like talking about the things that you're doing. And then ideally getting them to advocate for you, especially if like the most senior data person is at the director level. That director needs to be hanging out with the VPs a fair amount, talking to them about what they need, ideally delivering on what they need, and then getting those VPs to advocate for the things that data are doing. I think someone mentioned, you know, someone else is presenting a deck and they're not acknowledging, you know, how much the data team contributed to the information there. Like part of the job of an analytics leader is to make sure that the data team is in fact getting credited there, and going and talking to those VPs and saying like, look, like we're short on resources. It'd be really helpful if you could talk about, you know, how much we're helping your team when those conversations come up. And that's, again, it's this sort of like soft power, real politic aspect of working on a data team in an organization, but I think it's very, very important.
Yeah, that, like, to that point, the best way to not have a transactional relationship with the rest of the org is to not be transactional yourself. Like just proactively reaching out to people, even if you don't work with them that often, and say like, hey, I noticed this metric is doing this thing. You should probably know about it. Let me know if you want to talk about it in more detail. Just making sure that people are aware of stuff, even if they have no reason to otherwise know about what you're doing, is a really good technique for making sure that more people know about you. And more generally, I think just having several different investments in communication helps, whether it's like a newsletter, a Slack channel where you dump your analysis, directly reaching out to people. Like not putting all of your eggs in one basket communication wise is a pretty effective way of making sure that multiple people can consume the output of your team's work in a way that's native to them.
I think it's also it can also be useful, you know, a picture can tell 1,000 words. Putting a little extra effort into data visualizations that will catch people's eyes. You know, some of the good data work, you know, just gets to the point and you show the two quantities are different. But taking the time to put together a viz that will get people asking questions and, you know, asking how you did that, to show a little bit more about the decisions and the effort that goes into your work can go a long way towards the marketing aspect.
I 100% agree with that, Chris, especially given that I'm at a company where we have a lot of brand and marketing folks, right? So when you put data in front of them, they're like, well, my eyes are glazing over. But the moment you put a nice viz over it, they're like, wow, this dashboard is really nice looking. I'm like, okay, great. Now let's talk about what it means. And it kind of gives that sort of engagement, and 100% on the relationship piece. Because I think without that relationship, I often teach younger analysts too. I'm like, without that relationship, you lose the context, because then you make it transactional too, right? Like if someone enjoys working with you, they're going to give you more context too. Because it's like, hey, what are you up to? What problem are you trying to solve? And you start to train that muscle. I think what everyone's told me today about like how to make it more public, I'm definitely taking everyone's tip here, because I think those one-on-one relationships are great, except they're one-on-one. Like how do you build that perception across the organization is what I was trying to tackle too, is if I can't get to this person, then how do I build the relationship there, right? Which is like a wider cast net of perception. The work is there. It's just a matter of like, we never worked together, or perhaps you hadn't never had the need to work directly with me.
And
Yeah,
sometime, go ahead, Taylor.
Just the one thing I wanted to add is recognizing that all of this communication that we're talking about does take a lot of effort, and that it can be a significant part of the job. And so be cautious of, you know, burnout. When you're a manager, you're managing people, you are managing relationships across the organization. And then if you find yourself in the position to be the primary technical contributor as well, it's like as you're both analyst and you know, setting up Fivetran or whatever, like that is tough, and to take care of yourself. These are not trivial things to be doing. So my PSA from having burned out doing that.
I was going to tack on to what you were saying, Selena, around the importance of doing things publicly, not just managing those one-to-one relationships, is you want that goodwill to extend to your team. And so if Sally McMarketing and you have an incredible working relationship and she trusts you, but then a new analyst joins your team, that goodwill might not transfer directly. Whereas if the confidence is in the organization, then that goodwill is going to transfer in a different way.
Yeah, that also is something I'm working on, which is 100% correct, is how do you transfer and scale that goodwill, right? Because it's also a matter of not everybody going to you, right? So everyone's like, oh, I trust Selena and I have a great working relationship. And now that the team's scaling, I'm like, no, don't just come to me. Everyone here, on the team is also equally fantastic, except they're still developing their relationships, right? So trying to expand and really scale out the team in that trust and relationship piece.
Sort of echoing that and adding on, bringing back the sort of Slack channel piece of our company has like a Ask Data Slack channel. And so with questions that would be helpful to others as well, instead of slacking us directly, we ask them to Slack that channel. And so then we reply in that. We just hired a new analyst. And so something will be posted there. They may or may not know the answer. So I'll message them, be like, hey, do you know the answer to this? Just want to make sure. If you don't, here's the answer. So I want you to like learn what the answer is, but also get the goodwill brownie points for yourself instead of me trying to answer it and you sort of chiming in as well.
One of the really nice side effects of doing exactly what Steven just described, because we did the same thing at Casper, is you even see kind of your data champions from the functional departments chiming in and saying, hey, this is actually the answer to that, or hey, go look at this Looker dashboard and you can answer that question yourself. And you're building that kind of data culture, which reinforces then the work that your team is doing, building those products, building those ways for people to educate themselves, and maybe even saving someone on your time, someone on your team some time from doing anything at all.
Y'all, we figured it all out. We're done.
Actually, I had a question.
Yeah, Katie, please.
Sure. I had a question on a totally separate topic, if that's okay.
Of course.
I wanted to know if folks had recommendations for setting an analytics roadmap. Kind of if you're thinking about your analytics team or data team, like a product team, setting a roadmap in a way that's not like going out and gathering user stories from a bunch of stakeholders, but in the process, kind of opening a Pandora's box, like, oh, well, now that I think about it, this would be cool. That would be cool. That would be cool. And then setting a roadmap based on that, finding out that those user stories weren't actually the most impactful things, and the more impactful things are things that come up throughout the year. Does that make sense? I think someone actually put a similar post in the chat where they went to the CEO and ended up being counterproductive.
Looks like that was Chris. Chris, do you want to share a little bit about your experience? What didn't work?
Yeah. So that was that was more in response to, what's worked and what hasn't in terms of productizing the data team. In terms of the case there was just, sometimes it doesn't always work because they just treat that as, opening up direct Slack. What has worked in that vein is getting, in my case, there was one project manager and one product manager. We seem to be of the same mind about the data process, and getting them to evangelize sort of on our behalf was critical. In terms of the roadmap, I think working backwards from what the company is trying to do, what's on the product roadmap, what are the decisions they're going to need to make, where's data fitting into product, if there really are data-based products, and then working backwards from that. So the decisions that are upcoming for the company, whether it's revenue benchmarks or whatever, reallocating, making new hires to the products, working backwards from that for the roadmap.
So really having your independent data stance on where you can make the biggest impact
Yeah,
rather than kind of
I think
crowdsourcing.
yeah, because it really should be, I mean, the more you can tightly weave it with what, you know, the marketing team is doing, what is the, you know, what is the product team trying to do? Are they trying to, you know, launch something? So think about how you're going to inform that. And then the roadmap maybe comes from breaking out the steps towards that, you know, thoughtfully. That's something that only you know. It's like, what are the intermediate steps that are going to have to happen? What are the things along the way that are seriously hard, either infrastructurally or just intellectually, and mapping that out. That's where the road mapping part comes from us.
Yeah, very tactically for us, it comes from a combination of what comes down from OKRs of just like, here's what the company's working on, here's where we can be impactful. Like, this is the thing that's going to be in a research stage this quarter for another team. We know we're going to be really involved in that. This is the thing that's going to be delivered, and we know that there's downstream impacts that we'll have to deal with from that. But also layering on, we do like a periodic survey, and layering on things that we're hearing will be broadly impactful. So not asking people like, what do you wish we would build? But asking people like, what are your biggest pain points? Like, what is working for you? What's not working for you? And what can we do that has really high leverage? And do we find that like everyone's good with the sales team and they like, we really need to work super closely with them on something targeted? Or is it just like, everybody needs better training resources? We need to like go do some kind of cleanup of documentation and labeling. Like, what are the platform level work pieces that we can bring in to combine with those like very sort of specific projects that we know are coming?
Yeah, I think the other thing too is building in Slack for unknown unknowns, not just technical things that come up, but asks for your org that are going to come up. You know, you might make a new hire, you might bring in a new VP, you might, there are so many things, you know, when I used to write job descriptions, someone asked me like, why don't you put a 12-month roadmap? I was like, 12 months from now, who knows what this team is going to look like 12 months from now? Like 12 months is forever. I put a 90-day plan on job descriptions because I can tell you that far ahead. And so building in, even as you're thinking about that roadmap, what the next quarter, what the next 6 months looks like, building in Slack to that for the things that, you know, I guess there are no known unknowns, right? That you know things are going to pop up. You need to create space for them proactively.
There's been a side conversation happening in the chat around managing the manager to IC transition and burnout around that. Sounds like that might be another fun topic for another meetup if folks are interested.
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting conversation.
Awesome. We are right at time, but we don't have to end the conversation. And so there is that leading data teams Slack channel in LO, and I would love to have that be a space where people who are working on this transition in their organizations can kind of reach out, bounce ideas, get support, hear what other people are doing, and also just generally share how they're leading their organizations. I think there's a lot we can learn from each other. So I really appreciate the feedback and people sharing their experiences today.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much, Emilie, Taylor.
Thank y'all so much. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.